Hello, I'm Dr. Sarah McLusky. I'm a research events consultant and facilitator, and you are listening to the Academy's Developing Practice podcast.
Hi Sarah, we're really pleased to be speaking with you today. It was great to have you on the podcast so we can get talking about public and community partnerships. But before we get started, and we do this with all of our guests, could you please give us a little bit about your background and how you have arrived in the position that you're in today?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to meet you. And so what I do now is I basically help people to have conversations which move research forwards. Now that looks like lots of different things. So I help with organising events. I help with things like stakeholder engagement, research collaborations. I do facilitation, I do training, and just help people think through how they can build relationships that help them to get their research done, get their research out into the world, whatever it is they're aiming to do. So yeah, now in terms of how I got here, I have been doing this kind of work for over 25 years now. It started, I did do a PhD in the 90s, but that feels like a very, very long time ago now, and I've never used it in anger. But what I did get into is after I graduated my PhD, I was just looking for jobs, as you do, and kind of fell into doing science communication. At the time, that was a really growing field around the year 2000. There were all these Millennium Science Centres. It was just becoming a big thing. So I got into doing science communication. When you've been in this field for a long time, you see how things evolve over time. So science communication evolved into public engagement. Public engagement evolved into the impact agenda. And then starting to realise that the work that I did, a lot of the same principles apply, whether it's researchers talking to members of the public, kids, school groups. I used to do loads of that kind of stuff, but a lot of the same principles apply even if you want to go and talk to an industry partner, or you want to collaborate with a research team in another university. So a lot of the same principles apply. So I now work across that whole range of things.
So have you always been in higher education then? Is that where your career has always taken you?
I've always been. So I often describe myself as research adjacent. So I kind of skim around the edge. I've kind of skimmed around the edges of research. So when I first started, one of my first jobs was in a science centre, but then I ended up going into outreach in a university. So my next job after that, and there for a few years, was doing outreach. Then I got into managing like the STEM ambassadors program, which is helping researchers to go out into the community and share their research with, whether it's schools, whether it's partners, that sort of thing. Then I was freelance for a while, where I did that sort of stuff, organised big events where we get researchers to come in again, talk to kids, the British Science Festival and things like that. So we worked a lot with researchers there. I even taught researchers, so I was a college lecturer for a while. So I trained students in how to do research, and then I went into a university environment where I was a project manager, which also included doing the impact and engagement. I was manager of a research institute. So those are all the things that I did before I became freelance, which is what I do now. So yeah, I've kind of skirted around the research world in lots of different capacities.
Well, that gives you obviously a really varied career path and career journey up until this point. Is that mainly with UK universities? Have you done anything internationally that we should be aware of?
Do you know, I haven't done a lot internationally. Yeah, partly just because I think the way that life goes, I do think this is something that's often important, is not always talked about. But I've got a child who is in school, and obviously that means that I have to be based in one place. I've done a little bit of the odd kind of contract here and there for European organisations, but no, I am at the moment working with an international research network, helping to run their meetings, because again, engaging with people online across different countries, different language barriers, all that kind of stuff. It can get technically quite challenging. But no, mainly just in the UK.
Well, maybe this is the calling. This is what will happen now. Following on from this podcast, maybe there'll be big international collaborations that you'll be involved in.
Well, yeah, let's see.
We have our guest host with us today. So, Sibel, I'm going to come over to you right now for your sort of set of questions, if that's okay.
Yes, sure. Sarah, hi. It's really nice to have you today. I feel like being a research adjacent yourself, I feel like you would be better at seeing the big picture in research, because I feel like we focus a lot on very small things in our research. And do you feel the same? Do you feel the same thing when people tell you about their research?
Yeah, I think so. And I think actually that's one of the things, it's one of the things I really love about the job that I do, is I get to hear about all kinds of different research projects and all kinds of different things that people are working on. But it does mean that, yeah, I've both been around long enough to see the way that some of these trends have come and gone. I also have a good overview of the sector and what's going on and what the priorities are and that sort of thing. I also, because I've worked with lots of different audiences, I've got a really good understanding of what works and the kind of subtleties of what you need to do, and some of the principles of good partnerships, which I know is what we're going to talk about, is they apply no matter what the subject. People are often like, oh, what's your subject specialism? Actually, it doesn't really matter, because the principles of how people connect with each other are the same regardless of what the subject matter is.
Yeah, that is amazing. I also want to ask you something else too. What do you think about in-person versus online events? Because being COVID happened 6 years ago now, it changed lots of things to being online. And I think universities are encouraging us to attend online as well to save costs and stuff. But I feel like it's not the really best way to engage and, meet. What do you think about it?
Oh, I have so many opinions on this. We could probably make a whole podcast out of just my thoughts on this matter. Yes, I completely agree with you. I think they both have their value. And as I say, one of the projects I'm working on at the moment is an international research consortium. Without things like Zoom and video calls and stuff like that, that couldn't even exist. Or if it did exist, the work would progress much more slowly, because it would be harder to get people together in person and all that sort of stuff. So it definitely has value. Online has been amazing for people with disabilities, people who find it hard to travel due to caring responsibilities, all sorts of stuff like that. But I think what we've really learned is that online works for very straightforward information transfer. So just, these are the things that we know, we want to share them with you, and that works well online. There are some things you can do to improve engagement online, and that's again a lot of the stuff that I do is when I come in to try and do that, try and make things a little bit more dynamic. But if you want to build deep relationships with people, that's incredibly hard online. It's not impossible, but it is much easier to do in person. And it's because when you're in person, when we're on Zoom, you're very focused on the visual. So you're very like, I am looking at this thing. You also become very self-aware, because often, as I can see at the moment, I'm looking at a picture of myself, which you don't do in real life. So you become very self-conscious as well, I think. And so apart from the fact that I usually turn off self-view if I can. And so when you are actually in a room with people, you become less self-conscious. You pick up on other factors like body language. You pick up on some of the subtleties of just, how people position themselves, what they choose to go to, and you use all of your senses, not just the visual. And I think that leads to, it's much easier to build relationships. It's much easier to build trust and rapport and get to know people. And when you are looking at research partnerships, that is the most important thing. So the most important thing is good relationships between the people who are involved. And that it's not impossible to do online, but much easier to do in person.
I completely agree with that. And thank you. How do you think researchers should start thinking about developing public and community partnerships? Where should we start?
Oh, where do we start with this? I think I'm going to start to kind of channel Simon Sinek. I would say start with why. And I often say this when I go to talk to people about doing research partnerships. It's like, why are you doing? What do you want to get out of it? And sometimes, and actually, even if when people think about it, the reasons for doing it are because, well, that's the way I can get more funding, or I can, it'll be good for my professional development. Even if those reasons for doing it are feel like quite selfish reasons, they don't have to be completely altruistic. But I think actually recognizing why they want to do it is a really important starting point for building partnerships, because then you can start to think about what that looks like. Because research partnerships, public and community partnerships, there are so many different types. There's so many different kinds of organizations that you can partner with. There's so many different kinds of ages of the people that you might partner with. I mean, generally, you're looking at, fundamentally, when I think of public and community partnerships, it's two different groups of people. So there's either people who are what you might call communities of shared interest and shared experience. So that's people who have a topic that they're really passionate about. It might be, a particular activism, environmental activism, LGBTQI rights, something like that they're really interested in. It might be just that they're a religious community. It might be that they're a knitting group that gets together and socializes. So those are people who are choosing to come together around some kind of shared interest. The other type of people that you have are what I call experts by experience. And that means people who know a lot about something because they have lived through it. And that might be people who've got a particular health challenge, people who've got caring responsibilities, people who are experienced as being a refugee or, homeless or something like that. And thinking about, so as you can see, even just in the examples I've given there's a huge range of people. There's a huge range of different topics. Some of those will be very sensitive topics, very personal topics. Some of them are, just things that people do for fun. And all of them are potentially legitimate research partners, depending on what you want to do. And so it's really important to think about why you want to do it. And then in thinking about why you want to do it, who are going to be the right people to work with.
So who and why are our first questions then. So what do you think would be the key issues that researchers need to consider when building a public or community partnership?
Yes, again, once they've decided who it is that they want to work with and why they want to work with them, the next number one thing is just to go and get to know that community. Now, that might, and it's really important as well for researchers to go to them rather than expecting them to come to you. So it might mean going along to their meetings. It might mean just kind of, if they're on online groups, kind of asking if you can join the group, starting to get to know the sorts of things that people are talking about. Starting to build those relationships is really important. So it's basically just thinking, where do these people hang out? How can I go and hang out there too? And how will that help me to understand the sorts of issues and sorts of challenges that they have? So I would say that is the first thing to do. And the next thing to do is, as they get to know these communities, is to start to think about what the partners would potentially get out of a research partnership. So we've already thought about the researchers thinking, why did they want to do it? It's also really important to think about why would the community partners want to get involved. And some of the usually when things go a bit awry in research partnerships, it's because the partners feel like they're being taken advantage of in some way. And it may be that they feel that the researchers turn up and kind of extract knowledge from them and use up a lot of time and maybe don't give very much in return. or it can feel like they sort of parachute in and out. So they turn up, they do a project, and then they leave. And for the partners, nothing changes. So maybe there was this research that was being done on how to improve things for like homeless people or something, and then it comes to the end of the project and they're still homeless and nothing's changed, and it doesn't feel like they've necessarily got anything out of the process. So it's really important to think about how you can build in that reciprocity and how you can find a shared purpose where both parties feel that they're getting something out of it.
These are amazing points. I can see some similarities between public and community partnerships and research or commercial partnerships, like what will they get, who to go. And I'm going to this commercially confident workshop with the knowledge transfer office here, and I do realize the similarities now. I think it also feels a bit moving into uncertainty is the similarity, because in research, we want things to be step by step, ready to go. You know what you're going to do next, but it is totally different for commercial partnerships and also, I guess, public partnerships too, right?
Yeah, I think it's really important to go in with that open mind, whatever partnership it is. And it is good to go in with some kind of idea of what you want the direction to be. But it's also really important to allow the partners to help shape it, because otherwise that's, again, one of the reasons when it can start to feel a bit extractive is if you just go in and say, well, I know best and this is how it's going to be. And I think when people are open to those different perspectives, that's actually when you really start to get the magic of the partnership. And when you start to allow the partners to help to shape the research, and that's when it starts to become really genuinely a partnership rather than just a one-off kind of thing.
What would you say that the key differences between public and community partnerships and research or commercial partnerships? Now we talked about similarities, and maybe we should look out for the differences now.
Yeah, I think the differences are, well, so kind of industry type partnerships, often it is, so when you look at industry relationships, partnerships, this is all in my head at the moment because I'm writing some training on it for this week. There's a lot of issues there around, basically a commercial partnership is in some way going to be about making money or creating a product to put out into the world, some kind of service, something like that. So there's all kinds of stuff. There's really important stuff that needs to be put in place there around contracts and intellectual property and who owns what and, that side of things. So there's a level of commercial detail that needs to go into that partnership. But when it comes to a public and community partnership, actually, I think if you lead with that kind of stuff, it can shut down conversations because it starts to feel a bit too transactional. And now that's not to say that there shouldn't be some agreements around who does what, because there definitely should be. And that's also not to say that there should be money changing hands, because actually sometimes it's very appropriate that money changes hands. For example, you're working with a charity and they've got very limited budgets, then it's very appropriate that you pay people for their time and for the contributions that they make. But if you lead, I think in an industry partnership, that's the headline. That's where you come from. In a public and community partnership, those things are important, but you can't lead with it. You have to lead with the relationships and the people, basically.
Genuine relationships are really important for this then. How can collaborating with stakeholders also benefit your own research?
Yeah, I think that the reason that this has become such a prevalent part of research over the last 20 years, over the time I've been working in it, is because we really learned that if researchers go into it for the right reasons, with the right partners, and they're genuinely open to this collaboration, then it does make the research better. And often it's because we come in, all of us, with a certain amount of, you might have some knowledge of this community or the types of things they're interested in, but until you actually go and talk to them, you don't know what they really want. And if you go in and talk to them and are open, then you'll end up making research that is, it feels more satisfying to do it because it feels like it's actually helping real people, real tangible people. So it feels more satisfying to do it. You're also going to be doing something that's much more relevant. So you're not just guessing what you think these people might be interested in. They're actually telling you, they're saying these are the things that we're interested in. So that's another reason why it can make the research better, because you're actually then going to create something that the world wants rather than just something that in your head you thought was like a good idea, but you're not really sure. It also brings in, as we know, just having a diverse range of perspectives on something. Particularly in things like research with people with lived experience, it's just so important to give them a voice to say what it is that they want that would make a difference to them. And I've worked on quite a few projects with people with lived experience, and what's always really interesting is sometimes what they tell you is what you expected, but sometimes it's something completely different, and you just don't know that unless you go and talk to them.
Would you give any suggestions to researchers like myself, I'm a postdoc, about your career path? What should I do if I want to work with public and community partners or mediate these partnerships? What would you suggest for us?
I think just getting out there and having a go. I think it can feel, all of us get in our head too much about things, whatever it is. And just getting out there, talking to some people, giving it a go, knowing that you won't get it right first time, knowing that you might not get it right the 50th time. Even now, I've gone into rooms with people where I thought I knew what I was going into, and then actually it turns out it's something else. There will be some kind of unspoken issue going on, and it can sometimes take a bit of digging to get that out. So knowing that you just have to go in with humility, with genuine interest, and just see if you like it, if you enjoy it. I mean, what I would say is this sort of thing, it's not necessarily for everybody, and I don't think people should feel forced to do it if they don't want to, if it doesn't feel like part of their professional journey. I think it can make research better. I think all of the researchers that I've worked with who have reached very senior positions and have been very successful in drawing in lots of funding are very good at this stuff. So they're very good at partnerships, and whether it is industry partnerships, community partnerships, they get it and they understand why it's important to work with people. So that's one thing I would say. So it's definitely good for your career if you stay in research. But also some people start doing this stuff and realize that they enjoy it so much that they decide this is what they want to do as a full-time job. And certainly there are people whose job, there's people who work in universities, other research organisations, places like charities, and facilitating engagement is their full-time job, whether it's, research and impact people, whether it's engagement people in universities, whether it's community liaison people in charities. So there are jobs in this, if this is the kind of thing that people really, really love. But what I will say is that you do need to get some experience to get into those jobs. And that's why if you are a researcher now, doing a bit of this stuff and starting to figure out if you like it is really important.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Could you give us some tips for organizing good relationship building events? Because we do organize some events in the university as well, but we want to make them better. So could you give us some tips on it?
Yeah. Oh, where do I start with this? Tips on organising events. I think the first thing I would say, it's interesting you said we organise some of them in the university. One of the first things that I say to people if they want to build some genuine research partnerships is you don't have those meetings in the university. I understand why universities do it, it's because they've got suitable spaces, they've got, they know where everything is and it's free to hire the room and everything like that. But actually, for a lot of community partners, coming onto a university campus might as well be coming to the moon. And so it's sometimes the best thing you can do is go to them and hold an event in the, say you want to work with a support group, you go to their meeting and you have an event with them there. I think that's one of the first things to do. The second thing I would say is think really carefully about, when I go about setting the kind of setting the scene, as it were. One of the first things I do when I work on community partnerships, in the very first meeting we have, we agree kind of ground rules, and that is things like respecting everybody's opinion and not talking over each other, and think it's always the same kind of stuff that comes up. But I actually think it's really important to co-create that in the space. I also think it's really important to do things, really simple things that help people get to know each other. I know people think they don't like icebreaker activities, but the problem is if you don't have icebreaker activities, then nobody knows who anybody is, and then that becomes problematic in itself. So name badges, helping people do it's stuff like that is so simple, and because it's simple, people don't think it's important, but it's incredibly important. Just learning people's names, learning a little bit about them and their life is just so important. So don't forget things like that. Hospitality, also incredibly important. It just makes people feel valued. So giving them a cup of tea, giving them some cake, giving them, a voucher as a thank you for their time, if that's appropriate, depends what you're doing. But just being generous with your time, your attention, and with the resources. Universities have huge resources at their disposal compared to a lot of community partners. So just being generous with that, I think, can go a long way. And then my final tip for organising better, more collaborative meetings is thinking very carefully about who talks and for how long. If you can avoid the researchers standing at the front with a presentation, that is a win. So maybe thinking about, do you need presentations at all? If possible, I always say the researchers, because they are in a position of power, whether they realise it or not, and they don't talk first. Somebody else talks first, ideally from the partner organisation. Sometimes that's where facilitation can really help, is to help manage those relationships. But yeah, those are my tips there.
Amazing tips for us to work on. Thank you so much.
This podcast is called the Developing Practice Podcast. So we always finish it in the same way, Sarah. So we always get 3 or 4 take-home tips for the listeners that they can reflect on in terms of their own personal practice. So if you do have a few extra tips, you've given us so many already, but if you do have a few extra in relation to their practice, what would they be?
I don't know that I've got extra tips, but maybe I can go back and reiterate.
I think that'd be good if you could summarise.
Things
Definitely.
That I've summarise them. I think number one thing is, when you go into it, really think through what you're doing and why you're doing it. I'd say that's number one. Number two, go into it expecting this to be a long game. Don't go into it the week before a funding deadline because it says that you need to have a community partner and you just want to put somebody's name on the funding. Don't do that. No, start way before a funding deadline, build those genuine partnerships, those relationships. So go into expecting it to be a long term, and think very carefully about the power dynamics. Think about how you can go in and make the partners feel safe, feel valued, how you can introduce some reciprocity to the relationship. So it's not just you taking, but you're in some way giving them something. And what that something is can depend entirely on the partnership. Sometimes it's money. Sometimes, actually, when I said about not bringing them on the university campus, sometimes actually for them that's amazing. They're like, yes, please, can we come and see your fancy microscope or whatever it might be. So sometimes that's a lovely gift that you can give them. So, but thinking about reciprocity, thinking about the dynamics of the relationship, I think is really important. So those would be my top tips.
Brilliant. Thanks for your time, Sarah. And Sibel, thank you for hosting the podcast.
Thank you both. It was an amazing experience.
Thank you so much for having me.